Kratos, the ghost of Sparta, the god killer, one of the most iconic characters in gaming history, and also one of the most psychologically damaged. Because here's the thing about Kratos that I don't think people fully appreciate. His story isn't just about an angry guy killing gods for revenge, it's a genuinely profound exploration of trauma, guilt, and whether redemption is even possible after you've done unforgivable things. Let's get into it. Part 1, Complex PTSD, living in a perpetual trauma state. So let's start with the foundation. Kratos has severe complex PTSD. Now, regular PTSD comes from a single traumatic event. Complex PTSD comes from prolonged, repeated trauma, usually in situations where you can't escape, usually starting in childhood. And Kratos, his entire life is trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. He was a Spartan warrior, so right off the bat he was raised in a culture that glorified violence and dehumanized weakness. Then he became a general, leading men into battle, watching them die. Then he made a deal with Ares to save his own life, basically selling his soul to a god, and then Ares tricked him into killing his own wife and daughter. That last one is the core wound, the original trauma that everything else builds on. He slaughtered his own family while in a blind rage, and he didn't even realize what he was doing until it was too late. And the gods, they cursed him to forever wear their ashes on his skin, so he can never forget, never move on. He's literally marked by his worst act for the rest of his existence. That's not just trauma, that's a perpetual trauma state. Every time he looks at himself, he's reminded. Every moment of his life is a reenactment of that core wound, and you can see the symptoms of CPTSD throughout the entire series. Emotional dysregulation, the dude goes from zero to homicidal rage in seconds. Hypervigilance and aggression, he treats every situation as a life or death threat. Intrusive memories and flashbacks, the games literally show us his nightmares and visions of his family. But here's what's really interesting from a psychological perspective. Kratos' violent outbursts aren't just anger, they're a trauma response. In his mind, the world is fundamentally unsafe. Everyone will betray him, everyone will hurt him, and the only way to survive is to destroy threats before they destroy you. I must destroy or be destroyed. That's his operating system. That's complex PTSD in a nutshell. And for the entire Greek saga, he's stuck in this loop. Kill, feel guilty, kill more to avoid feeling guilty, feel more guilty, kill even more. There's no healing, no processing, just violence as the only coping mechanism he knows. Part 2, Moral Injury, the wound that never heals. Now let's talk about moral injury, because this is Kratos' defining psychological issue. Moral injury happens when you do something or fail to prevent something that violates your core moral code, and it creates this deep shame and self-condemnation that's almost worse than regular trauma. For Kratos, the moral injury starts with killing his family. He was a warrior, yes, but he was also a father and a husband. Those were his people. His job was to protect them, and instead, he murdered them with his own hands. That's not just trauma, that's a complete shattering of his moral identity. And what makes it worse is that he keeps adding to it. He slaughters countless people across the Greek games, gods, mortals, innocents who just happen to be in his way. He destroys entire civilizations in his quest for vengeance. And here's the thing about moral injury, vengeance doesn't fix it. Killing Zeus doesn't bring his family back. Destroying Olympus doesn't erase the guilt. You can see this most clearly at the end of God of War 3. After he finally kills Zeus, after he's torn down all of Olympus, there's no satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness. He's hollow. Because he's realized that all of this violence hasn't healed anything, it's just compounded the moral wound. That moment when he kills Athena and she asks why he's helping humanity after everything, and he just walks away in silence. That's moral injury. He can't articulate it, he can't justify it. He just knows that he's done irredeemable things and there's no fixing it. Because by God of War 2018, Kratos is trying to do the work. He's obsessed with making sure Atreus doesn't become like him. That's not just good parenting, that's moral injury repair work. He's trying to break the cycle, trying to create something good from all this destruction, trying to prove that maybe, just maybe, he's not completely beyond redemption. Part 3. Dissociation and identity fragmentation. Alright, so here's something really interesting about Kratos from a psychological standpoint. He's essentially two different people. There's the ghost of Sparta, the rage-filled god killer, the monster who destroys everything in his path. And then there's Father Kratos, the restrained, thoughtful protector trying to raise his son right. These aren't just different moods, these are dissociated identity states. And this is actually a common trauma response when someone has done things they can't reconcile with who they want to be. It's called identity fragmentation. Your sense of self splits into different parts because the whole picture is too painful to hold all at once. In therapy terms, specifically internal family systems therapy, we'd say Kratos has different parts: his warrior part, his father part, his monster part. And for most of his life, these parts have been at war with each other. The ghost of Sparta is shame-driven and reactive. He's the part that takes over when Kratos feels threatened or reminded of his past. It's pure survival mode, with no room for nuance or vulnerability. Father Kratos is reflective and restrained. He's the part that wants to be different, to be better, to give Atreus the father he never had. And the entire arc of God of War 2018 and Ragnarok is about integrating these parts. About Kratos learning to accept his violent past without letting it define his future. About making peace with the monster inside instead of pretending it doesn't exist. That moment in Ragnarok when he finally tells Atreus the full truth about his past. When he opens up about his mistakes and his pain. That's integration. That's the different parts of himself finally coming together into one coherent person. And that's incredibly difficult psychological work. Most people with this level of trauma never get there. But Kratos does, and that's what makes his character arc so compelling. Part 4, ALEXITHYMIA, when you can't name the pain. Let's talk about something that makes Kratos feel so real. He has massive difficulty expressing emotions verbally. There's actually a term for this, ALEXITHYMIA. It means you have trouble identifying and describing your own emotions. You feel things, sometimes intensely, but you can't translate those feelings into words. And Kratos? Textbook case. Boy, that's not just a meme. That's ALEXITHYMIA in action. He can't express what he's feeling, so he just barks commands. He replaces emotional communication with action. When he's angry, he fights. When he's guilty, he isolates. When he's scared for Atreus, he becomes overprotective and controlling. But actually saying, I'm scared, or I love you, or I'm struggling with this, that's almost impossible for him. This is really common in people with severe trauma, especially men who were raised in cultures that punished emotional expression. You learn that feelings are weakness, that vulnerability gets you killed, so you just shut that part of yourself down. But the feelings don't go away, they just come out sideways, through violence, through avoidance, through awkward attempts at connection that don't quite land. And watching Kratos slowly develop emotional literacy across the Norse games is genuinely beautiful. By Ragnarok, he's actually able to say things like, I was wrong, and express vulnerability to Atreus. That's massive growth. That's years of psychological work condensed into a character arc. It's not that he suddenly becomes emotionally articulate, he's still awkward and gruff. But he's trying. He's learning a new language after spending his entire life mute. Art 5. Survivor's guilt and existential guilt. Here's something that haunts Kratos throughout his entire story. He outlives everyone. His brother, his fellow Spartans, his wife and daughter, his second wife, countless allies and companions. And in the Greek games, he literally kills most of the pantheon. That creates this intense survivor's guilt. Why am I still here when everyone else is dead? What right do I have to keep living? But for Kratos, it goes deeper than normal survivor's guilt. It becomes existential guilt, because he's not just someone who survived, he's the reason so many people are dead. His quest for vengeance destroyed the Greek world, plunged it into chaos, killed gods who, for all their flaws, were holding things together. And all those consequences, all those deaths, that's on him. So he's not just guilty about surviving, he's guilty about existing, about what he represents. He's a destructive force and he knows it. That's why he isolates in the Norse realm. Why he tries to hide from his past, why he's so determined to be different for Atreus. Because he's carrying the weight of entire civilizations he's destroyed and he's terrified of doing it again. And that kind of guilt, that doesn't just go away. You don't just get over being responsible for that level of destruction. The best you can do is try to contain it. Try to make sure it doesn't spread. That's what Father Kratos is doing, constantly restraining himself, constantly holding back, because he knows what happens when he lets loose. Part 6. From learned helplessness to post-traumatic growth. For most of the Greek games, Kratos is trapped in what psychologists call learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is when you've been through so much suffering that you stop believing you have any real control. No matter what I do, the outcome is pain. The gods control everything. I'm just a puppet. And that's exactly how Kratos thinks for most of the early games. He's reactive, not proactive. He's responding to manipulation and betrayal over and over, and he starts to believe that's just how the world works. But then, something shifts. By the time we get to the Norse games, Kratos is making different choices. He chooses to be a father. He chooses to teach Atreus. He chooses to help people, even when it doesn't benefit him. He chooses restraint over rage. This is what's called post-traumatic growth. It's when you don't just recover from trauma, you actually grow beyond who you were before. You find new purpose, new meaning, new ways of being that you wouldn't have discovered without going through hell. For Kratos, that growth comes through fatherhood, through choosing to break the cycle instead of perpetuating it, through reclaiming agency not through power, but through conscious, deliberate choice. We must be better. That's his mantra. And it's not just about Atreus, it's about him. He's actively choosing, every day, to be someone different than the ghost of Sparta. That's trauma recovery. That's what healing actually looks like. Not forgetting the past, not being magically fixed, but integrating it and choosing to move forward differently. Part 7, Intergenerational Trauma and Breaking the Cycle. Kratos' father, Zeus, was a tyrant. Paranoid, controlling, willing to kill his own children to maintain power. He modeled that abusive, authoritarian version of fatherhood. And what does Kratos do? He nearly repeats the exact same pattern with Atreus. He's overprotective to the point of being controlling. He withholds information. He struggles to show affection. He's so afraid of Atreus becoming like him that he almost pushes him into becoming exactly that through his harshness. This is textbook intergenerational trauma. The patterns get passed down, father to son, unless someone consciously chooses to break them. And that's what makes Kratos' arc so profound. He does break it. Not perfectly, not easily, but he does it. He learns to be vulnerable with Atreus, to admit his mistakes, to apologize, to show love even when it's terrifying, to give Atreus the space to make his own choices even when those choices scare him. That's incredibly difficult work. Most people can't do it. Most people just perpetuate the cycle unconsciously. But Kratos, through sheer force of will and genuine love for his son, manages to be different. And that's one of the most hopeful messages in gaming, that trauma doesn't have to be inherited, that you can look at the worst parts of yourself, the worst parts of your lineage, and say, no, it ends with me. Part 8, the Jungian layer, shadow integration. Quick detour into some deeper psychology. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow. The shadow is all the parts of yourself you reject or repress. The anger, the darkness, the capacity for violence. Everyone has a shadow, but most people spend their lives pretending it doesn't exist. Kratos' entire Greek saga is what Jung would call shadow possession. He is the monster. He's completely identified with his dark side to the point where that's all he is. But the Norse games, that's shadow integration. He's acknowledging the monster without letting it rule him. He's accepting that yes, he's capable of terrible violence, but that's not all he is. He can choose when and how that part of him shows up. That moment in Ragnarok when he goes full Ghost of Sparta to protect Atreus and then immediately reins it back in, that's perfect shadow integration. He's accessing that power when needed, but not being consumed by it. Jung called this the wounded healer archetype, someone who's been through hell and uses that experience to help others avoid the same fate. That's exactly what Kratos becomes for Atreus. He teaches his son how to live with power ethically because he's lived the opposite. He's the cautionary tale and the guide at the same time. So there it is. The psychology of Kratos. He's not just an angry god killer. He's a man dealing with severe, complex PTSD, devastating moral injury, identity fragmentation, and survivor's guilt that would crush most people. He does the work. He confronts his trauma. He integrates his shadow. He breaks the cycle of intergenerational abuse. He learns to be vulnerable and express emotions even when it's terrifying. That's what redemption actually looks like. Not some magical transformation where you become a different person, but the slow, painful work of accepting who you've been while choosing to be different going forward. Kratos at the end of Ragnarok is still the ghost of Sparta. He still carries all that trauma and guilt, but he's also a father, a mentor, someone capable of love and growth. He's both. And that's the point. Healing doesn't mean erasing your past, it means making peace with it. And honestly, that makes Kratos one of the most psychologically realistic and hopeful characters in gaming. Because if he can do the work after everything he's done, then maybe there's hope for the rest of us too. That's it for this one. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you want more psychological breakdowns of game characters, let me know who you want to see next. I'll catch you in the next one.